Welcome to the Business of Family, the podcast where we explore the stories, challenges, and opportunities of family businesses. I'm your host, Tammy Buss, and I'm a family business survivor, and I'm also a family business advisor. In this show, we'll be talking with family business leaders and experts to bring you insights and inspiration so you too can survive your family business journey. Whether you're a founder, a successor, a professional, or just curious about family business, this podcast is for you. So welcome. Today's guest is Bryan White from Ardent Industries. He's a co-president with his brother. Very interesting story today. Welcome, Bryan.
Thanks for having me.
Listen, you have a very interesting story. This has been a family business, been around for how many years now?
48.
48. So tell us that evolution of the beginning of that business to how you ended up being a co-president with your brother and how that works.
So the original business, which is Steelway Building Systems, was kind of founded kind of accidentally, like many good entrepreneurial stories. My parents are tobacco farmers, and farming isn't a 365 days of the year event. And my father was always into building things, and he wanted to be busy all the time, and he just had kind of, in today's world, they call them side hustles. Mm-hmm. And he was doing raw iron work. He was working on farm equipment and converting tractors into forklifts and doing all these interesting things. And he wanted a building to work out of, and he built that. And then he wanted a new barn for the farm, and he built that. And then a neighbor saw the barn and said, "I really like that. Can you build me one too?" And then next thing you know, he's in the building systems business. And in the early years, he was a farmer and an entrepreneur, balancing both, really thinking that geographically he's, kind of, if I can get work 100 kilometers from home, I'm going to do really well. And so I had this kind of small vision of what this business could be. And as it grew, he had to make the decision at some point, I'm either an entrepreneur or I'm a farmer. And though farming, something he was passionate about for his entire life, he really saw more potential in being an entrepreneur and then focused more on the business. And he transitioned out of tobacco in the early 80s, seeing that he didn't have a future for it, transitioned into tomatoes, and then eventually exited that. And was still very passionate about being involved in farming whatever way he could.
Now, just a question. Was the family farm prior to your dad, or was your dad the first generation with the family farm?
He was second generation on the farm, so he bought it from my grandfather, and then started the business on the farm, and that's where the business is today. Mm-hmm. We've never left the original family farm.
Oh, interesting.
And it's a long story, so I'll try to kind of tighten it up and make it shorter. Of course, you go through downturns, recessions, and challenges, and fought his way through those into, kind of fast forward into, say, the early 2000s. And that's by the time my brother and I were joining the business in a more active way. And in early 2000s, we were in the building systems business. We got into the overhead crane business, again, very accidentally. It was the concept of, we were building a paint line in our own factory, and one of the things my dad loved to do, I joked that my dad was in business so he could build his own equipment, and because that's what he was passionate about, was we built a lot of the fabrication equipment that we actually used in our facility, and he wanted to build this paint line, but he wasn't quite sure what to do, so he actually reached out to another company and asked for a quote, and we always joke and say the quote was the go-away quote. It seemed very expensive for what it was. And so we did some more research and stumbled across a company that said, "Hey, we'll sell you the hoist for this. And this order is enough to make you a distributor of the product. Mm. And then you can build cranes." And he's like, "Oh, okay, let's just build cranes." And that was like the entire business plan that was put into we knew somebody that could sell it. And then, so in early 2001 or so, we were all of a sudden in the overhead crane business. And so that was still within the walls of Stewart Building Systems, and it was called Stewart Material Handling, and that was just another brand that we were selling. And it was in, let's make it my dates right. So in 2005, my dad was diagnosed with cancer, and he kind of exited the business to focus on his health, and then he unfortunately passed away in February 2006, and November 2006, and he so we were my brother and I were kind of thrust into this, and we were, I was in my late 20s, and my brother was in his very early 30s, and the benefit of being young and dumb is that you don't even realize how in over your head you actually are. Because looking back at it, we certainly were, but we had an amazing team of people, and the business was well set up, and with a good customer base and repeat customers, and so it was kind of easy to keep it going.
And what position did you and your brother have at this point when your dad passed?
Yeah, so I joined the business I graduated from university in 2002 and joined the business in kind of a strange way. Our VP operations needed to go on a medical leave, and I was asked, can you just hold it together while he's away? I'm like, I can hold it together. But I didn't step in as that role. I said, I'll be the production manager. I will do this. And I was doing a good job. And when that individual returned, we wanted to do some adjustments of the role, and things got complicated, and that individual chose not to be with the business anymore. And so I played that role for a period of time, and probably that's what it was when Glenn passed away. And my brother was doing more of kind of some of the maintenance and facility side of the business. So we kind of got thrown in this weird situation where we didn't know what our roles really were and how we should have divided them. And fairly short, so when he passed away, it wasn't very clear. Fairly quickly after, it was important to us to demonstrate the fact that we were equal owners in this business and we're equal partners in the business. And that's when we fell into the role of co-presidents, and we just said we're co-presidents. My brother was co-president external relations, and I was co-president of operations. And that was just the way we divided it. It was kind of like if the people that worked for us dealt with people outside the building, they were Jason's responsibility. If they were inside the building, they were my responsibility. And we drew straws, and he got the short one and got accounting. And that was how we divided it, and that worked for years. And then kind of as the story goes, because there's acquisitions, there's other things we bolted out of this business, and throughout time, in 2011, we had this crane portion of our business, and it was kind of like it was living in the shadow of a bigger company. It was having trouble getting attention. We kind of said we either have to pay a lot of attention to it, or we got to kind of get rid of it. And it needed to be more full service. It needed more to it. So we decided that we would like to grow it and turn it into a larger coverage and get the service out of the business. And the easiest way for us to grow it, given the fact that in Elmer, Ontario is not the mecca of cranes, it's more the Golden Horseshoe, your Hamilton, Stony Creek, Oakville, Burlington into Toronto. So we started looking.
Steel mecca.
That's where
that area.
That's where overhead cranes are inside buildings in that type of industry. So we started looking for an opportunity to buy a service company, because then you're manufacturing your service, you can do the installations and maintenance and everything associated with it, and be the larger offering to the customers. And so we just literally knocked on doors. Mm-hmm. Like we went to people and said, hey, we'd like to buy a crane service company. Are you interested in selling? And we ended up finding 4 people. They were the right people at the right time. We'd actually made an offer to a company and it didn't go anywhere. And then found this other one, and one of the four was ready for retirement, and they weren't really too sure how to facilitate that. And four great people, and I say they weren't really entrepreneurs. They were four people that wanted an awesome place to work, and they didn't like where they were, so they decided to start their own great place to work. And they built an amazing company in a 10-year period of time. And the company was Zealous Material Handling, and we ended up putting a deal together in 2012 to acquire that. And so that was kind of one of the first big moves that my brother and I made, kind of post Glenn's passing, and then we continued. We had an opportunity. The company that we were unable to make a deal with, a couple years later, we were able to make a deal with. So we bought another one and kind of amalgamated it into Zealous. And then in 2018, we ended up buying another company and amalgamating it into Zealous. Incidentally, again, one of the companies we looked at prior. So Zealous today is a collection of multiple crane companies that we've brought together, and growing that considerably since we acquired it. And then to kind of tell the story of continued acquisitions and kind of the growth there. And in 2016, we started the Ardent brand, and that was really, it's very much a marketing play. It is, we needed something to tie these companies together. So at that point in time, we had Steelway and Zealous, and we also have a brand called X Steel, which is parts and pieces of what Steelway makes sold through a different path to market. And we wanted to be able to tie these together and have some sort of opportunity to co-market. And in my head, it was always like, there's going to be other opportunities to buy companies. And if we have a parent brand that we can work with, then we can acquire and market, and ultimately could be a place that you kind of hold your culture and maybe some leadership and management. And so we established that and kind of launched that in 2016, and it wasn't until 2021 that actually really made sense. So it seems like many companies have like part of their business that doesn't get the attention it deserves. Zealous had that. It had a little overhead door portion of the business that was started before we bought it, and we kept it going. And one day we kept growing the crane side, and the door side's just staying the same. And we said, we either need to shut this down because it's just not getting the attention it deserves.
Deja vu.
Yeah, or we need to turn it into something. And we said, well, we could shut it down, but it actually, like revenue-wise, it's a nice sized little company. It was just, less than 10% of the overall revenue of the total company. And so we had an idea. We said, well, the best way to spin it out on its own and give it some daylight is to buy another door company, and ideally not in Stony Creek, because that's where Zealous is located. Let's look in the London area. So my general manager at Zealous was tasked with knocking on doors again. And since that's what he did, he just started calling people. And he ended up calling a company that was low on his list. It was called London Automatic Doors at the time. And it was low on his list because it was a sister company to Glass Canada. And but he ended up calling and somehow getting the cell phone number of the owner, and somehow getting in touch with him, and somehow having a conversation. I say somehow because when I've talked to the owner numerous times since then, he's like, I don't know how he managed to get me. And owners are sometimes protected.
Yes, very much.
And from contact from the outside world. And so it turns out that they had this conversation and ended kind of weird. It was like, oh, well, no, here's the person you need to talk to. And they're like, and our timing was absolutely perfect. He was actually in the process of marketing the company for sale, but he wanted to sell both companies. So we looked at the opportunity and jumped all over it and managed it. And it was a competitive situation because it was being marketed by an M&A firm, and we had to put our best foot forward, and we had to make our offer be the best offer for the seller. And it's one of those things where money isn't everything, and when entrepreneurs sell businesses, money isn't everything,
No.
because
No.
they're kind of their children.
Yep.
And when they sell them,
They're
it's
their
'cause they're growing
firstborn
up.
in a lot of cases, or the favored child.
Yeah.
I've heard that a
Yeah.
lot.
And they're growing up, and they're letting them out of the house, and they wanted it really well taken care of, and ultimately we were the ones that were able to put that best offer together. So suddenly we were taking an overhead door company, living in the shadow of a crane company, and we're trying to solve that problem by buying an overhead door company that's living in the shadow of a glass company.
So is this just going to keep going and going and going?
So we ended up putting that deal together, and that closed in April 2021, and we ultimately renamed London Automatic Doors to Venture Door Technologies, and amalgamated the bit from Zealous into it. And then we just a year ago, beginning of September, we bought a small locksmith company in Windsor to bolt onto that as well, with this kind of vision of true Southwestern Ontario coverage for the overhead door business and automatic door business. Those are kind of the two cornerstone products that Ventry does. Lots of other products in that field as well. And then Glass Canada is a commercial and residential glass company. So we do multi-story commercial curtain walls, storefronts, residential windows, doors, showers, railings. If it has to do with glass and a building, we touch it. So
when you go back, so we really think about this is all started because your dad liked to tinker and change things from, like, what did you say, a tractor into a forklift. Yeah. So has this changed at all, your role for you and your brother as co-presidents? Is he still sort of the outside and you're still the inside? Is that still the same?
It's changed dramatically over time. So little part of the story to fill in, when my dad was diagnosed with cancer, he, first of all, and I didn't find this out till years later, actually was trying to sell the company. That was my mom and dad saw the company as a burden that they didn't want us to have. And the funny thing,
so common with first gen families. So common.
And my brother and I never saw it as a burden. We saw the pain, we saw the torture, but we saw that as being the path or the past, and we saw lots of opportunity for us. But
so your parents didn't really talk about it as a potential family business that would be passed on. It just sort of happened that way, but more from your side and your brother's side than your parents' side.
It always felt like it was something that was going to live to the next generation. But when you're faced with your own mortality, you might change the way that you're looking at that, and that's really what it was. Because it was very odd for him to have that kind of conversation without us. He was very open book. We knew everything that was going on in the business. There wasn't secrets, and but this was kind of, he was looking at, the plan A is win the battle with cancer, but if that doesn't work out, how can I clean things up? Mm-hmm. And my brother knew about it at the time, and he got very upset about it. And my mom realized he was upset about it. My mom stopped the whole thing and said, "This isn't happening. And the kids want this, give them an opportunity." So we purchased the company. We did a very traditional freezing of the assets and creating pref shares and common shares for us for the future value of the company. A very traditional transition. And over time, we purchased those, or bought all those pref shares back, and we're in full control of it. My mom had walked away from the business at that point in time. They were both involved for decades. And so we were, by the time he passed away, we had actually for 6 or 8 months before he passed away, we had already finished that deal. Mm-hmm. And his illness expedited getting it done, but it became quite evident that's what everyone wanted, and that's certainly what Dad wanted. Mm-hmm. He just felt concern about that.
Mm-hmm. And that happens a lot. You spend a lot of time, a lot of sweat and energy into building a business, and sometimes you just don't want your kids to have to continue to deal with that. But that hard work has already been done. That heavy lifting to get it off the ground is complete, and now you can take it and run with it and see the opportunities. But back to you and your brother. So how is the relationship changed as co-presidents now from where you started as internal and external?
So it kind of evolved little bits here and there. The fundamental biggest change to our business would be in 2019 when we started to implement the Entrepreneurial Operating System, or EOS. And it was something I was exposed to through a business group I'm in, and I had some good friends that were, a year or so ahead of me in that program. I was seeing really good things, and I was seeing some challenges. We had a leadership team at Steelway that was trying to become a little more independent of my brother and I, and struggling tremendously in doing so. Having 2-3 hour long meetings that with no action out of the end of it, and circling the drain for the whole time. And I had suggested, hey, I've heard about this thing called the EOS, you guys should look into this. And then they didn't, and then I suggested again, and they didn't. And I think I finally did when the owner of the company suggests a couple of times you look into something, maybe you should look into it, because I wanted them to believe it. It was something that was going to need everyone's buy-in. They started digging into it, chatting some people that were using it, and it was very helpful for them, so they started to believe it too. My brother honestly was the biggest holdout in it, for good reason. There's a lot of training, a lot of there's half-day workshops every week you can go to, and their unforgetting curve is a real thing. So you're going to forget this stuff fast. And so he didn't want to do something that we just tried and we did it for 2 months, 3 months, and all of a sudden it was a failure and we're off to something else. He really wanted, if we're going to invest, we're going to be all in. And he went from being had the biggest reservation to it, to being the biggest advocate of it. He hates meetings, and EOS is a meeting every week. But he's like, he learned through this that he hates unstructured meetings. He doesn't mind a very structured, efficient meeting that there's actions, and he knows there's only an hour and a half, and he knows the agenda, and he knows that it's going to be beneficial. And so at that point, one of the first steps in EOS is you create your accountability chart, which is an organizational chart by another name. The fundamental difference is you can be in multiple spots on an accountability chart. And he quite quickly didn't have a spot on it. And he was very happy about that. And the other part of EOS that was very powerful for me personally was this distinction between a visionary and integrator, that the top level leadership in a company isn't one person. It needs to be two people. And as I was exposed to more learnings and what other people were doing, and through groups that I'm in, I was really leaning towards this, like, I have this vision of what we could do, and the day-to-day stuff was nothing I wanted to be involved in. And this was like a breath of fresh air for me. Like, so this visionary role, this, like, it could be a CEO, and then your operations person is the president, or however you want to divide it up. In our case, it's president and general manager is what we use for titles, the president being the more visionary individual. And that was a big relief for me, because finally we could kind of put a structure in place that allowed me to have the crazy ideas and the ADHD and
as most entrepreneurs have.
Yeah, and all the things that are really horrible for the rest of the business, because the vast majority of a company, of any business, they want structure and they want clarity, and most entrepreneurs, that is a weakness of theirs. They cannot provide structure, they cannot provide clarity, they can't get out of their head what they want to do, and because what they want to do today is different what they wanted to do yesterday, it's a lot of scatterbrain thinking and big thinking, and that's it's actually
and they need
disruptive.
a good team around them to be able to implement and actually take some of those ideas and run with them.
So that would be disruptive to the rest of the business. So during that process, I filled the visionary role, and we put integrators at every company, or general managers at each company, and my brother is in kind of a box off to the side, which he's very happy to be in. I call it the big brother.
The big brother box?
That's his role. Because he's the one that keeps me from making really horrible decisions. And he's also the one that'll come to you sometimes and just put his arm around you and say, think I got to get you back between the lines here. You're going off in a direction that maybe you shouldn't, and then he gets to do other stuff that he's passionate about. For me, I want him to be doing what he loves every single day, and if he doesn't want to do something, let's find a way for him not to do it. And he wants the same for me. So we work hard to make sure our roles
aligned
are
where you want. Yeah. So how is this going to play out, do you think, for the next generation? Because your Gen 2, although it was a smaller company, it's a larger company. And you've got, between you and your brother, you've got kids that are older. You've got Gen 3s and 20. I think your oldest is 20. Right down to, I don't know, 7, 8?
No, not that young. 12.
12. So you got a range there that's coming up. So what is the plan then for Gen 3? Or have you started to talk about that yet?
There has been conversations about that. Certainly some of that next generation's involved in the business today. And my nephew's been quite heavily involved in it. But he's not in a leadership role, but in a very, he works in the business. And he's off at school right now, which is my brother misses him quickly because he does a lot of stuff on projects my brother's involved in. But so I've given a lot of thought about that next generation, and part of the strategy about having these kind of independent companies. So Steelway, Zealous, Glass Canada, Ventry all run completely independently of each other. They have their own leadership team. They have their own. We've implemented EOS separately, each one of them. They have that leadership team. They have a general manager. They have their own vision. They have what they want to do. Their own growth strategies, their own payroll, everything. They're a very independent company, and the goal has always been that if we wanted to sell one off for any reason, we could just do that. To keep it as clean as possible. And we're trying to set, we're working to set Ardent up as a shared service company. So it would be things like IT and HR and marketing and those types of activities that can be shared amongst the companies. And if you ever were to sell one of the individual companies, you could still sell that service for a period of time or forever, depending on what the new owner wanted out of it. And so in doing that and creating that structure, it also allows the next generation to come in a I think gives them a greater opportunity for success. What I've seen in my family business friends, the ones that have like 6, 7, 5, whatever kids or that next generation involved, it becomes really challenging. I know somebody who talked to somebody who has 17 family members in a business that all have ownership roles, and they range from working on the plant floor to being the president. And it's insanity to me. I just can't see that many people ever getting along and working out.
Well, no, and as you know, you understand the 3-circle model. You use the 4-room model, I think. So you can actually separate that a little, but they don't all have to be involved in the business, right? It's the difference between the ownership structure and then working in the business. But since the way you and your brother were brought into the business by your dad being sick and potentially selling it, and your mom stopping that, do you openly talk about that more with the next gen, about the possibilities or the opportunities in the business?
So I wasn't raised in a family. I was raised in a family business, and that's a line that I've used for years. And it's not a bad thing. It's not necessarily a good thing. I didn't know anything different. I grew up 300 feet from the business in the country. So there's literally just some trees between the office and the kitchen, the dining room table. So the dining room table was often a meeting. And we knew, that's why I said earlier, we knew everything was going on in the business because we just had those conversations. So I was raised in it. I didn't know anything different. The next generation hasn't experienced that as much. They're certainly involved. They certainly know what's going on. My brother and I don't really keep secrets from our children on what's going on in the business. And so our kind of path into it was a little different than what the next generation for us is. The breaking up the different companies, I feel, gives us an opportunity to say, well, this, you can work in this business for a number of years, and you're not competing with your cousins or your siblings or anything like that. You're doing your thing over here, and you're doing your thing over here, and kind of get them split up. And ownership and involvement are two very distinctly different things.
Mm-hmm.
They can have ownership and have absolutely no involvement in
Absolutely.
the company whatsoever.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the goal would be to facilitate that, if that were to what made the most sense. But trying to give them some options, basically, to what they're interested in, what they want to learn, and hopefully they all spend some time in each business, or they go off and do whatever they want. I'm not hung up that they have to be involved in the next generation. There's an opportunity there. If they are interested and capable, then there's going to be opportunities. If they're not interested, do what's passionate. Life's the one thing that watching my dad, build his dream house and then die in it shortly after. Well, almost, it wasn't even quite finished yet. Changes your perspective.
Absolutely.
So I want my kids to do what makes them happy, because that's all that I ask for myself. And so we're going to set things up the best way we possibly can for them to find their happiness.
Good. Well, we're just about out of time, but I do like to finish with a couple of questions, or actually I want you to sort of give our listeners or the people watching your 3 top tips for being in a family business, working with siblings, whatever your tip would be. Things to do or not to do. They can be either or. Your 3 top tips.
I would be structure, and structure at this point. What I've seen, if you think you're going to sell your business, or you think you're going to pass your business on to the next generation, the best thing you can do as an owner is make yourself redundant. You should, if you're involved in anything day to day, figure out right now how to not be involved in day to day. You should have absolutely
great advice.
Absolutely nothing to do with anything day to day. If you're dealing with customers, you're having to deal with vendors. If there's any word that if you weren't there, a vendor's not going to deal with you, you got a problem. You got to fix that. And so make yourself completely redundant, and then make a structure that you could hand off to someone else. That's the greatest gift that EOS gave us. I'm not here promoting EOS.
I'm going to say you could be an implementer pretty soon here. Yeah. They're going to be calling you.
That would be a nightmare for me. But EOS has created a structure for us. There's other programs out there. There's other systems out there. This happened to be the one that fell in our lap. And people have a role. It allows us to create a vision. We know what we're striving for, in 10 years. We know, we're doing in 3 years. We know we're doing this year. We know we're doing this quarter. We know what we did last week to move towards that vision. And I can hand that off to someone else. And I've got a team in place. And when you bring a new team member in, we've brought in new senior leaders into this environment, and they hit the ground running. 4 times a year you're having an offsite, day long, and once a year it's a 2-day long meeting. On 2 occasions, we brought employees in before their start date to participate in that meeting. And they thank us for it, because they say, my first day of work, I just hit the ground running. I already know the values. I know the purpose. I know our niche. I know why we're doing what we're doing, because we've created that great structure. So I have all the confidence that I can hand that off to the next generation. So creating that, and I'm not a structured person. There's no scenario where I'm a structured person. This has created it, forced it on me, and forced it on our team. And I think it's the greatest gift that we could possibly give the next generation, if they want to be involved in it, or if we wanted to sell it.
Right.
I guarantee you that if you have and you can prove, and EOS allows me to prove that I don't have any involvement in the daily operation of the business, I get like a 1x extra multiple on the value of the company.
Absolutely. Because they don't care if you're there or not. So that's 2.
Structure.
So what was the 3rd structure? That's 2 structures. What's the 3rd structure?
I don't know. I'm so in what's going on in the world right now, creating this environment creating a structured environment has paid so much benefit.
Would you say communication might be, if I'm not putting words in your mouth, but would it be communicating?
Well, communicating is
because you have to be if you're working side by side with your brother on a daily basis.
Yeah, I guess specifically working with a family member is it's really about leveraging each other's strengths, like I know what my brother's good at, and recognizing there's things that he frustrates me on days, and I know I frustrate him. There's no possible way I don't frustrate him. But together we're making good decisions, we're aligned on the longer term vision, and know when to walk away from stuff and just say, hey, that's his decision, and I'll let it be, and whatever the results are, I'll live with, and he'll do vice versa with me.
Right.
So yeah, between family members, there needs to be definitely needs to be a lot of good communication and understanding and empathy, and you need to, at the end of the day, I care tremendously about my brother, and I want him to be happy, and I want to make business decisions that facilitate him being happy, because I know he wants the same for me.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming in today and sharing your story and telling us all about the evolution from a tobacco farm to this vast, I don't know what do you call empire now of all these companies.
I don't know if that's the word, but I gave you the very, very abridged version of it, though.
Well, it is a short podcast, so we don't have time. We might have to have you back to fill in the gaps. But again, I want to thank you very much for coming in today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
If you like this episode, subscribe to the Business of Family podcast on your favorite listening platform. You can also find BlueRoots on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. On the next show, I'll be back with another amazing guest who will inspire you with their family business insights. Until then, take care and keep it in the family. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, tax, investment, or insurance advice. Before acting on any advice, please contact your personal or company advisors.